Thanks for jumping on. Uh, Let me just do a quick double check. Okay, good, good, good. We're live. Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on to the podcast. I think I forget who reached out to who first, but I knew about Jason. I think when you guys like really recently, you guys came out and launched. I think, and I followed you guys, and I was really interested in what you're building because I haven't seen it before. Essentially, what you're building is indexes for prediction markets, which is totally new category. And yeah, I just wanted to get you on to discuss more about that, what you're working on. And yeah, and you're also backed by some pretty big people. So in terms of that, I think you guys are kind of like hiding out on Twitter. You're not as out there. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of get get you on and talk more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, so we're a data company. We're building indices on prediction markets and event contracts. What that generally looks like, and why we kind of see opportunity for it is um, within an individual exchange, like a Polymarket or a Kalshi. They are growing the amount of contracts that they're listing at 20 to 30x a year. There's now tens of thousands of these contracts, and there's also, it feels like every week, like there was just one this morning. There's like new DCMs being applied for and being approved, and then exchanges launching. And so, within this year and into next year, we're going to have, hundreds of thousands to millions of these contracts that exist. And prediction markets are great in the sense that they're super expressive. People can, pick very specific events, times of those events, individual strikes on those events, and that's really good for and super interesting for a lot of traders. But there's also an entirely other group of traders that want to trade broader trends and themes. And that's what we're doing. We're taking prediction markets and event contracts and putting them together into thoughtfully weighted indices that express a broad theme or trend or category or even like return profile. And today these exist as data products on our website. And we're starting to distribute them through partners, but going forward they'll be tradable, whether that is through kind of like other like derivative instruments or direct indexing into them.
And so basically, like if I have this right, what it is it's almost like right now what it is a basket of prediction markets, correct? Or a basket of event contracts, and it's displayed on your site as almost like you know a way to track these markets. You know, are we kind of able to dive into an example here on
Yeah,
the
for sure.
website?
Yeah. If you want to go to like our blue index, you know, what we kind of do, what we do with that, and why we like went with uh, political indices initially, you'll see it under party composites, um, is that elections are are one of the like lowest hanging fruit in the sense of they are like regularly occurring. They don't resolve early, and like they're always going to kind of be listed. Yeah, feel free to click into one of those. There'll be a lot more kind of data underlying it. And so like if you scroll to the constituents and you expand them, you'll see everything that's underlying them. Um, where we effectively have hundreds of these markets. So, like, these are the presidency, things around the Senate, mayoral races, gubernatorial races, etc. We weight them based on things like timed expiration, their volume. For like Senate, or sorry, for governor or like mayoral races, we'll weight them based on population, as they're like more. It's like more applicable to like the state and like local races. And what you end up getting is kind of this like blended overall like value, and then in index that tracks like broad based Democrat in this case, and like blue forward looking like expectations on like what they'll be like, how they'll be like throughout the US, right? So like today, like, if you wanted to trade something or even just like look at something from like a data perspective around like around like Democrats within the U.S., right? There's probably a few things you would do. You might look at polls. If you're on prediction markets, you might look at the 28 presidential, market. That's like a little bit far out. It's also, there's a lot of things you have to think about in terms of like, like various like potential nominees there, or just like broad party control. Midterms are coming up. So there's a handful of markets on Polymarket and Kalshi, just like specifically around those, like Dem Sweep and so on, or various control markets for the Senate. And you might be able to you might want to look at those. Our index, Blue, is broader in the sense of it's not just focused on one race, the presidency, or focused on like one like set of races, like the midterms. In we're blending the presidency, we're blending all of the midterms, we're blending various races in between those as well into like one broad market, just focused on forward expectations of Dem control. And there's kind of like a few unique things that you get when you do that. The first one is this is a continual index that we rebalance. So as elections occur and then those markets are determined and resolved, they kind of roll off. And as new elections are like listed, like new contracts for elections are listed, they become included within the index. And this thing can kind of continually exist and perpetually trade as well.
Lucas, one second. I'm actually just going to turn my fan off. I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but let me just shut that off. Hold on one. All right, thank you for that. Yeah, this is really interesting. So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking to myself that this is probably the most. I've looked at a lot of analytics platforms. This definitely has like a lot of data points that you can look at, more so than I think I've seen on maybe some other analytic platforms.
Sure.
What type of traders do you think are going to be going in here and using these indices right now? I mean, I think it's going to be, like for trading, like when trading becomes available, I think it's fairly obvious that maybe like what I would think it'd be people who kind of want to passively invest in these markets. Do I have that right? So like that's, when trading goes live, you might look at an index to basically get exposure to this category. Is that kind of the deal with these?
So yeah, definitely on the passive side, that's something you could do. I think like the ideal like trader here for specifically these political indices though are for like Blue, for example, traders that maybe feel like, okay, like it's pretty clear like there might be like a midterm sweep, right? And like, okay, like we feel like there's going to be like a Dem president, right? Like they just kind of see this like blue wave and they just want like broad based like event linked exposure to that, right? And rather than going and buying like Democrat proxy equities or going and I don't know, like shorting Bitcoin, or even just like going onto these platforms and like buying like individual contracts, whether it's like on a specific race or even the somewhat broader control markets. This is like the broadest based peer event linked exposure that you could have to the Democrats, right? Or to the Republicans. Or as we kind of build out future indices around economics and financials, weather, kind of every single category, culture, sports, etc., that kind of exists within prediction markets, like we'll be providing you broad-based exposure to like whatever that category is or whatever that might be. But it'll still be in an event-linked way where there's underlying prediction markets on it. In terms of the data on our platform, we have a lot of it. We have more of it through our APIs as well. And I think like there is definitely a lot that you can kind of like glean and like read and like learn about within like on our website. We're looking to and are like distributing it through like various like prediction market terminals as well. So you can kind of see these like broad like snapshots of these indices at kind of like a high level next to like maybe like individual markets that you trade. But we also see like a lot of this data being like, you know, kind of like very easily like picked up and interacted with agents. In the sense of like, okay, like we kind of have all of this like information around like this like broad index, and paired with like our news APIs and kind of like other APIs and stuff that we have, just like talking to Claude about it can kind of give you like a pretty interesting view of the world. Or alternatively, if you're talking to Claude about like Democrats or like some like broad theme or whatever, Claude going out and like getting like like looking at like our index values and like how the index has changed over the last like few months or a year, right? It kind of helps to ground them in the sense of like directions that things are going as well.
Yeah, I think, even right now, like, would you theoretically be able to set up a, index trading token to track one of these indexes using your API? Like, could you like if someone wanted, could they, set up like some sort of trading vault that taps into Blue, for instance, and is able to, kind of track that market already? Just
Yeah,
using
so I'd say like if someone wanted to like have like a vault or like some other type of like financial product, whatever, that's like benchmarked against our indices, yeah, reach out. We're licensing our data to do that. We're also working with like a few select partners now on it as well.
Who's using the platform right now before the trading is live? Like who do you see kind of like, who are your core users currently?
Yeah, so on like specifically on the data platform here, this is like a pretty like new, like prediction markets are like a new asset class. Building indices on top of them and having them like thematic and categorical is also like is really new and kind of like there's a lot of education, I would say, to like there, and so like that's kind of where we're like pointing people to like read our methodologies, which are fully public and transparent. Look at the data, like talk to agents about the data, and really like understand like how we've kind of put this together, the thought and the time that we have spent on constructing the index and future indices that we have, and so on. In addition to kind of the index and data business, we run like a daily, weekly newsletter, Adjacent News as well, which is like where a majority of current users that we have are today. Through that, we're publishing, like interesting or like differentiated markets kind of across different platforms, general news. We're talking about our indices a lot as well there. We'll be opening up like API access and have like a few other like cool announcements towards the end of the month as well.
Do you think products like this might be more beneficial for prediction markets than maybe when you look at like traditional equities and things like that? It's a question that I ask often, because I find that maybe more so than other asset classes, like prediction markets require a lot of active investment, like a lot of active monitoring of your positions. It's all event based, so there's like you're on the clock for basically every position you go into. It's not something you can really just passively hold. At least I haven't met anyone who's passively holding stuff. I mean, I think that the best solution to that is probably copy trading. But how do you see like the value of this product, like how, in terms of scale?
So the value of indices is that they increase the TAM of the space, right? So like today, as you had mentioned, like, okay, like it's basically like everybody that's trading, they're extremely active in their trading and kind of constantly being online, constantly monitoring their positions and so on. And they also are looking for they're looking to put on trades, that fit within like the binary contract where, maybe they're coming in at like 30, 40 cents and they're doubling and exiting at like 80 cents or something like this, right? And by building broader based composites and indices, right, what we end up doing is, since it holds a bunch of these a bunch of prediction markets, a bunch of event contracts that have like staggered maturities and kind of all trade at different values and so on. It's a different return profile, when there's a product that you can kind of trade against it, in the sense of like, you're not going to like 2, 3, 4, 5x or go down like 80, 90, 99%, right? It's like probably somewhere in the middle. And so like one that like opens up to like a broader group of traders and investors that like are maybe like more inclined to trade something with a return profile like that. And two, it allows them to almost like not, I think like a lot of time when these like active traders are trading prediction markets, it's like, okay, let's really understand the rules and the resolution, and let's really like, pick the venue, pick the the specific contract that I want to get exposure to something. In this sense, you're almost outsourcing you have an idea of something that you want to get exposure to and that you want to trade, and you want it to be event linked. And you're outsourcing the expression of that to us, and you're saying like, okay, like Adjacent is really good at building super transparent methodologies, getting like pulling together all of the contracts that would make up the entirety of the exposure of like forward-looking, Democrat control or something like this, like Blue, or for other indices that we have, if it's like something macro or something else, right? Like, okay, you kind of trust us to build these things to get you the exposure that you want. And you can you don't have to worry about the resolutions. You don't have to worry about picking the specific markets and so on, right? You're just kind of trading the broader thing. And I think like one that's probably pretty appealing to like a decent amount of prediction market traders today, but more so people that are like watching prediction markets. They want to get into trading prediction markets. Maybe they look at it, pull up Poly or Call Sheet to like look at the data and kind of like understand certain things, but they haven't really yet like started trading it a lot because they want something that trades perpetually. They want something that is maybe like a little safer, has a different return profile, and allows them to trade like broader themes and trends.
So the other thing I'm curious about is how you put together these indexes, right? So I think the ones here that are a very good example are blue and red for Republican, Democrat parties, and I think it's I think as we approach midterms like these, this could get to be a pretty hot area. But how would you categorize, say, like geopolitical events? Would you create like an Iran index? Would you create how do you decide what goes into an index? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so like outside of like identifying like venues that we want to work with or categories or whatever, like the first thing that we think through is can this thing trade or exist continually, right? Which means that like if we have some index on some geopolitical event, will there always be markets available to where we can support that index, right? Like if we were to spin up one just on like something culturally, something in culture, like around like Taylor Swift or like around like some specific, like popular culture thing that exists for only a few weeks, right? That's like really hard for us to like continue providing that exposure through that index because like we can't guarantee those markets over time, right? Something like elections obviously works really well for this. Macro or like economic indicators and releases work really well for this, right? Because like there'll always be markets on it. They exist on like a very defined time frame and so on. The second thing is like early resolution. So we have some ideas around this, but like generally speaking, it's a lot easier to build an index where the markets can't early resolve. Because we'll know exact like rebalancing dates, when to like move constituents in and out and so on, versus something that like maybe is like, will this thing happen by the end of the year, and it resolves in January, right? And then a new market on that theme or trend isn't listed. And so after the category, we kind of think about like these like initial like market structure or like index structure things, and then we kind of move on to scoping out the universe of like potential constituents. So like if it were to be like a geopolitical event, right? Okay, like let's look at all like Middle East geopolitical like contracts and events, right? From there, we started exploring things like, okay, how can we trust like the resolution of this to be like properly resolved, especially as you look at like various like UMA stuff on Polymarket or even like on Kalshi, and we've been toying around with like in building like internal ratings for these contracts, where we can kind of look at like past performance within a category, within a specific event, or within a series, on like how it's resolved and so on. And then we kind of scope it down into like, okay, this is the universe of contracts that we could have. Is there any alternative data that we can, like, outside of like volume weighting or like weighting by liquidity or weighting by timed expiration? Is there any like alternative set of data that is like needed or interesting to include in how we weight these things? Like, for example, with our election indices, including population weighting for things like mayoral races or things like gubernatorial races, where like we probably want to weight like we want to weight New York City's mayoral contest a lot more than some like tiny little city, right? And so like, is there anything there that we might maybe need to add? And then from there we just start building the index and back testing it, testing a lot of our ideas around it, like different constituents, what we add, what we don't add, these different like weighting methodologies and so on.
Yeah, you could get really creative with it. I mean, you could get, you could have like, I think that you mentioned we could have, we focus on New York, or we could have like an index that focuses on just small cities, for instance. So you could have like a small city index. You could have a big city index. You could have East Coast index. Like you could get like very, very specific with these indexes, and I feel like there's a lot of different possibilities. Would you ever consider user generation, or would you prefer to kind of keep it controlled by the team? And if so, why do you think that that's a better option?
Yeah. So on the first point of like, yeah, like there's tons of like derived indices where like we could like take something like red or blue, which is broad US, and then we just like cut it up like, okay, blue but it's small cities, blue but it's big cities, etc. And so as we're thinking about kind of two things on the index side, which is building more index families, so like outside of politics moving into economics, financials, and so on, but then also within a family building more derived indices on like a red or a blue or something like this. On user created indices is kind of interesting. So right, over the last few years there's been like a huge trend in just like broadly like in the rise of like direct indexing, right? You can do it like directly from like your public app. I'm sure you can do it from Robinhood pretty soon. The rise of kind of people like building their own baskets and then trading those baskets and so on. I think like when we think about building indices, there was a lot of backtesting and work and thought in the methodology that ended up being what red and blue are. But it doesn't mean that like indices that we have in the future can't be like a lot simpler, like smaller in scope, like much simpler in methodology and so on. And I think to do that, we can effectively like have a handful of products like where people can kind of come and build their own baskets of these contracts, which like may not be continually traded. It might not have like all of these additional kind of like weightings around them like we do with like population or so on, right? It might just be like they're assigning 10% weight to this, 15% weight to this, and so on. And that could be like a consumer product. But then we could also have like a much broader built out kind of like index builder platform that we'd look to build custom indices with like exchanges or asset managers or like other partners and so on.
Yeah. So if I'm a trader, I think that I would probably use this like, if I thought that there was going to be an influx in volume on democratic prediction markets.
Yep.
That's, and again, this kind of gets into the trading portion, which isn't live yet. And I understand you guys might still be designing it. But I find the trading portion very interesting. I would probably invest in it if I thought that there was going to be an influx in volume into these markets in general. So for me, trading an index is almost like a volume play. like I'm almost betting on the amount of volume that's coming into these markets. Is that fair to say, or is there more to it than that, would you say?
Yeah, so like when you, I guess like when you refer to like volume coming into these markets, you just mean like a lot of people bidding up like the yes, Democrats will win the presidential election.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Or
yeah,
even no. I guess you could do no as well.
sure, sure.
Um,
Yeah, I mean like, for blue, like it has, 100 plus constituents and they're all yes, a Democrat will win. Yes, a Democrat will win, right? And they're of course weighted and kind of throughout like all levels of office and so on. But it's effectively like gives you pure exposure to uh, Democrats winning any level of office across any state. And so if you just have this very broad view that okay, yes, like you know, Democrats are going to be um, winning these various like levels of office in these various states and stuff, like taking all the swing states and 28 and all these things. Um, but like you don't want to like express that view on a specific state or a specific office or a specific time. Like this is the product for you, right?
mm,
It's just broad, super broad based, super high level. But if you do have very specific views on like individual candidates, states, elections, and so on, like you should be trading the direct market. Um,
I love this product. I mean, I think it's great. I think this is a product that a lot of people have been waiting for. Just because you have a feeling that Democrats might win, but you don't want to take the individual bets. And you know, I yeah, so I think it's a great product. Will the trading be in what will the trading look like? Are you able to kind of tease that a little bit? Like, is it going to be a token that you can buy and kind of you get exposure to it that way? Or, what what does that operation look like?
yeah, so I think there's kind of three categories of potential tradable things on this. The first one is kind of like what we referred to before, which is just like direct indexing. So like you can put some money in and it buys, all the constituents at, the weights that they're at and it rebalances them. And so like that could end up looking like a tokenized vault, or it doesn't even need to necessarily be tokenized, or it could be both, right? But just like some type of like fund that is doing that for you. The second is more on the derivative side. Like since this is a continual index, it could trade perpetually, which is interesting because it kind of gives you access to leverage. And the third is more like kind of is like bilateral OTC traded, or more like regulated products.
So in terms of, kind of what your plans are, like what your timeline is, what is the next thing that you're kind of developing for adjacent right now? Like what is you know, if you want to kind of tease the rollout a little bit, because I see you guys just announced your investment round, which was I think for 2.5 million pre-seed, and you're
Yep.
backed by some big people. You're backed by I think 5CC, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
5CC, they're now UFO Holdings, Adia Noah. Yeah. As well
yeah,
as Van
so,
Eck and Maven and DCG and so on.
yeah. So you've racked up a lot of interest on this product. What was it like to pitch those guys? In terms of getting that interest. I mean, did you have prior connections? To those, to some of those people, or did you cold pitch them on this, and were they blown away by the idea? What was kind of like the process there?
Yeah, I mean, we had prior connections, and all the interests were warm. If not, I will say like I was working at DCG for the last few years as well. Um, but yeah.
Cool. In terms of kind of like institutional reception to this product, what are they? What's how excited are they about prediction markets, about seeing more kind of institutional stuff like this? I kind of view this platform as something that they would like to use,
Yeah, sure.
especially
Yeah.
since we're building like an API layer. So what has been their opinion so far?
Yeah, I think like whether it's us or kind of anybody else that's like building things that are more geared towards institutions, like the main question is just around, or concern is just always around liquidity, right? And some of these markets are very thin, and it's tough to get size on. I think broadly for like our product for institutions, though, right? We kind of initially see as we kind of build out our suite of index families and indices, our product just being like a great data resource for them to kind of look at for broader based trends, right? In the same way that like a majority of people that go to a Polymarket or Kalshi are just looking at the themes and looking at the markets rather than actually trading the markets, right? The benefit we provide, of course, is that this is a continual index that exists, and is rebalanced, and is on broad themes rather than like if you went to a Polymarket or a Kalshi today and you're like an institution and you're looking at a specific market. Not only do you have to like reason about whatever that market is on, but you have to reason like, will it happen by this date, right? Or like, will this specific strike within that market happen? Yeah.
What do you think in terms of narrative? Like you have red and blue up here.
Yep.
What index would you like to really kind of, you know, what index do you think is really interesting to you outside of politics? Like, outside of this category of,
Yeah. So
maybe election politics, what else do you think is a very interesting, index that you have or that you're planning to create?
so I think a few things. One that is like pretty interesting that we kind of keep thinking through is like, now there are a handful of markets that are based on company KPIs, like uh you know like earnings, but then like also like, will Tesla deliver this many vehicles by this date, or like, will there be this many new subscribers for Robinhood Gold, or and so on. And so uh we are actively building indices around KPIs, which are an interesting alternative, or supplement to like the individual stock or the individual company, where you can bet or trade or on like individual company growth within a specific category, rather than like everything else that's like related to like their equity, right? I think like everyone has, like anyone that's traded has traded a company around earnings, and feel that the company is doing great and they're going to crush earnings, and then the stock goes down at earnings, right? And so this is kind of like a more like pure like event linked way to do that. I also think we're working through a few ideas around what some sports indices might look like, as well.
Yeah, that could be really interesting because you could get like you could get granular, right? You could get granular with the type of athletes that you want to create indexes around. Like you could create like an emotional expression index for sports people. Like I saw an interesting market about Messi, like will he cry or not, which was pretty controversial because I think it just got like I think there was some controversial UMA stuff there, but you could create like a kind of like off sports market, right? Sports market index about things that are not related to sports or something like that. I don't know, but
Yep.
there's some crazy stuff that you could get into, which I think would be pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, the the space for launching new markets, launching new prediction markets is like kind of infinite. And so, the amount of indices and the style or types of indices that we build, are equally to more.
So you have a media strategy that you're working on as well, which you mentioned earlier that you're kind of leading with, which I think is really interesting. What is the plan there, right? So I think initially you started out as a newsletter, and you're using your indexes to inform the newsletter a little bit. Cool, which is a cool strategy. But I'm wondering if you want to kind of elaborate on the plan that you have for for the media side of things.
Yeah. So like our media business, started as a newsletter where I was just kind of like posting like thoughts on things, and so it was like very opinion based. Over the last maybe like 6 to 12 months, we have started working with a top polymarket trader, goes by Profit, who
Oh yeah, we know Profit.
Who writes our daily pieces. So these kind of come out every morning. They feature index movements as well as like 3 to 5 or some more like interesting markets with like a little bit of commentary. We roll out weekly posts with like much deeper commentary and kind of around like what was happening that week and markets there as well as combined with some of Profit's like broader opinion pieces. And that's kind of where it is now. Where we're looking for it to go is start to build out more like longer form research pieces, both on individual markets, but also on like index construction, how certain indices that we have had performed in the past. Like, okay, like if we had something like red, what would it have looked like during like the Trump elections, right? Or something like this, right? And this is like both like, I think like pretty interesting content, but also educational. To in the sense of like understanding how an index might work, how it performs, and informing you on like how it could like perform like in the future based on however your expectation of certain events. And I think like we'll just kind of keep growing what is our like daily and weekly newsletter, but also like research and opinion side into just content around prediction markets, event contracts, indices that we have, whether that's like about specific markets or indices or about just like the broader industry, exchanges, regulation, et cetera.
Yeah, I really like what you're doing because, and again, I come from a debt background, and I've thought about creating ways for people to passively invest in prediction markets for a while. I mean, we've interviewed a few fund platforms that are, like basically their go-to-market or their core product is, the user-generated way, right? Like users will generate funds, you'll jump into that fund and you'll passively invest. The reason I like this and what you've built is because it's so detailed. It's so, and I'm guessing that you're following a standard in traditional finance in creating these indexes, right? Like you have population weight, you have all this information that kind of ties into the index, and it's also very specific, right? Like if you're creating a user generated fund platform, you can't rely on those fund leaders to create the correct indexes you want. They're going to create the indexes they want, which is like good and bad. I mean, I guess there's more optionality, maybe there's more optionality at the beginning, but it could be very messy, right? So I like what you guys are building because it's curated and there's a lot of data that is basically being put in there to set up a benchmark that people can rely on.
Yep, exactly. You got it right.
Yeah. So it's a pretty exciting product. From your background, you work with a lot of traditional finance. You come from a background that's kind of steeped in that area. What do you think they're underestimating right now in prediction markets, if they're underestimating anything?
Underestimating is interesting. I think they're waiting on some things. I think like from the more like institutional side, I think that they're waiting on like being extremely comfortable with how exchanges resolve contracts, being very comfortable with how rules are written and how the market is like structured and like how detailed the potential resolution is. I think they're waiting on standardized, like more standardization on contracts cross-platform and cross-venue. I think they're waiting on standardization for markets listing, markets resolution, and like determination. Sometimes there's like massive gaps between like when like a market is determined and when it's resolved, and where you wouldn't get paid out until it was resolved. Sometimes it's minutes, but sometimes it's months. I think they're waiting on like better listing cadence. Like I think there's a lot of things that are kind of the exchanges are working on, of course, but like to make them like more institutional friendly and more of something that like an institution can kind of get behind and really trust. Um, Waiting on, I think like again, or underestimating is like, I think again, like they're definitely waiting on like liquidity and like increased liquidity into more like of the like non-sports, non-culture, like more of the economic or the election markets and so on. Um, but I think like they're underestimating like the scale in the sense of like I mean, it feels like every month or two there's a new DCM. There are tons of there's many exchanges that like their kind of go to market and approach is focused on like one specific type of category or one specific set of contracts where they like may or may not have like better distribution than kind of the more generalized incumbent exchanges. And I also think like they are right. Like my background and our broader team's background is crypto, and like I think that they are maybe like underestimating the like the interest in getting like peer event linked or event based exposure into something and trading that theme or that trend versus people that want to just purchase like or trade like a broader like proxy equity to get them there on that trend.
So we're almost out of time here. I just have a couple more questions for you on the platform and what you're building. And I'm curious, through all this data that you've compiled, are you seeing any seriously like mispriced narratives that, or mispriced market areas that you think deserve a lot more attention based on some of the indexes that you've compiled?
I mean, like mispriced like markets, like that's not like I guess it's not like really like our place to say. Although like maybe like you'll have like profit, we'll throw in some of those in our newsletters and so on. In terms of like
maybe I should say like underappreciated, like maybe not mispriced, but undersought, I should say.
Yeah, undersought, underappreciated. There's a handful of these markets across platforms. Like ForecastX probably has like the most of them, but Polymarket US filed for them or self-certified them the other day, which is just like markets on like bills and so on, like within Congress, which I think are like pretty interesting. And have like really good informational value. Although would also recognize that like they also probably have like a pretty large gap for potential like insider like information and trading. Although that does seem like pretty easily like policed or kind of like regulated in the sense of you should know who's kind of like around that bill. So I think those are interesting. I think weather markets are like pretty popular, but I like continue to think that like markets not necessarily just on temperature, but like on like broader like natural disasters and like broader like weather events are interesting. Funnily, like also to like pull it back to the filings or the certifications the other day, there was one that was certified for like will there be a weather delay during some sports game or something like that, and so like maybe like you would classify that under sports, maybe you classify that under weather, maybe it's both, whatever. But I find those pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, it seems like there's a few categories out there that are pretty interesting, but the demand seems to still be concentrated in like heavily in sports and and in elections. Right. Like, you would agree with that for the most part, that most of the demand is going to like election markets or sports markets. And sometimes you see like demand going to, like the Fed markets or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. What are some underappreciated markets or categories that you like?
It's tough to say, because they all have low liquidity. That's that's like the big issue. You see, I think what you mentioned, like bills would be good. I'm definitely interested in those. I mean, I am interested in like the hyper super like local political stuff too. Like whenever you see a market pop up that's like very localized, but a lot of those get like no volume. So
yeah,
so that's I think the big issue there. But you guys would potentially solve that, or or at least fix that a little bit.
Sorry. Yeah. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think it's pretty good. So yeah, I think it's a really cool product. I can't wait to try it out in terms of trading. Like when you guys release trading, it's going to be awesome. And yeah, I'm just really hyped about what you guys are building. Is there anything you kind of want to shout out before we close out here, or mention that you guys, have upcoming?
Yeah, I mean, like, right, like upcoming, we're going to be launching a lot new, many more indices, new index families, and throughout the summer, trading. I think like something to shout is like our DMs are always open. My Twitter is 0xperp, and I'd love to kind of hear from anyone around like indices that they find interesting, that they want to like see as data products, that if we had something where you could build them, they would build, or if they're like interested in trading them and so on. We're kind of always down to chat different index ideas.
Lucas, it was great to have you on to talk about this. Thanks again, and yeah, definitely keep me posted on what's happening.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.